In the middle of a blizzard, a young girl followed her German shepherd through the ruins of Ashfield, Oregon, and found 2 federal agents bound and poisoned in the snow. What began as a rescue became a revelation as a 10-year-old orphan and a broken dog uncovered the remnants of a deadly government project. Some storms are sent to destroy us, others to reveal who we are. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you still believe loyalty can save a life. Snow fell soft and soundless across the small town of Pine Ridge, Montana. By dusk, the sky had the color of tarnished silver, and the wind carved long, sighing notes through the alleys. 10-year-old Emma Quinn walked with her chin tucked into her coat, her thin frame half swallowed by wool too big for her. The hem brushed the tops of her worn boots, soaked dark from slush. She carried a canvas bag slung across her shoulder, its weight too light to mean food or warmth, just scraps a blanket corner. Her breath came in white clouds that broke and drifted behind her. The world was silent except for a distant hum from the highway and the steady crunch of her boots on ice. She turned onto a narrow road leading up a low ridge behind town. Pine Ridge was the kind of place people passed through, not one where anyone stayed, gas station, diner, a post office with a crooked flag. Every window now was dark blinds drawn. Emma had learned which porches had motion lights, which dogs barked, which paths stayed clear. The storm was closing in. She could smell it in the metallic bite of the air. She needed to reach the cabin before night swallowed the trail. The cabin wasn't really a home. It was an old Forest Service outpost left to rot after the road washed out years ago. The roof sagged and one of the shutters clung by a single hinge. But it was dry and the wind didn't reach all the way inside. Emma climbed the last hill boots, sliding, and pushed open the warped door with her shoulder. The wood groaned, then gave way. The air inside was stale with dust and old ash. She could see her breath curl through the gloom. A cot sat along the far wall, blanket folded though not neatly. Someone had been here before her. She paused, eyes narrowing at the faint ring on the crate beside the bed, a mug-shaped stain fresh enough that the metal still gleamed. She whispered to herself, maybe just a hunter, though she didn't believe it. She shut the door and dropped the latch, the sound of the wind muffled instantly, leaving only her own heartbeat. Emma worked fast. She knelt by the iron stove in the corner, pulled lint and sticks from her sack, and struck a match. The spark flared orange, reflecting in her wide eyes. Soon a small fire crackled, casting thin warmth into the room. She stretched her hands toward it, feeling blood return to her fingers, then pulled a can of soup from the bag. She opened it with a rusted opener, poured the contents into a dented tin pot, and set it over the flame. The scent salt and metal made her stomach twist with both hunger and guilt. From her coat pocket she drew out a folded photograph. A man in a firefighter's jacket smiling, his hand on a little girl's shoulder, hers. The edges were soft from being handled too much. "Hi, Dad," she murmured. She stared for only a moment before sliding it away again. Looking at it too long made the air feel thin. A sound broke the quiet. Not the wind, not the creak of old timber. A low whine somewhere behind the stack of boxes near the wall. Emma froze. She reached for her flashlight thumb, trembling against the switch. "Hello." Her voice was barely a whisper. The noise came again, pained short like air forced through a throat. She stepped closer, the beam shaking slightly. Between 2 crates, 2 eyes glowed back at her, amber, unblinking. She gasped and stumbled back, then steadied the light. It was a German shepherd, large but thin, its fur matted and streaked with frost. One front leg was trapped beneath a fallen board, the paw twisted unnaturally. The animal growled softly, more warning than threat. "It's okay," she said, her voice shaking. "I won't hurt you." She crouched low, hand extended. The dog watched her carefully, ribs rising and falling fast. When her fingers brushed his muzzle, he didn't snap. His fur was cold and smelled faintly of burned rubber and smoke, like something had exploded near him. She tried the board. It wouldn't move. She braced her small shoulder and pushed with everything she had. The plank shifted an inch, then another. The dog whimpered, then pulled his paw free, trembling, but silent. Emma dropped beside him. The leg wasn't broken, just raw and cut. She found a safety pin and used it to pick out bits of grit, whispering, "Almost done, boy." He didn't fight her. When she finished, she poured a little warm water from the pot to clean the wound. The dog licked her wrist once, tentative, as if unsure what kindness was supposed to feel like. The collar around his neck was thick leather. A small metal tag hung from it. No name, just the letters K9 and a string of numbers. She ran her thumb over them. A working dog. Police, maybe? She pressed the side of the collar and felt a small, hard lump, smooth like a grain of rice. When she pushed it, a faint red light blinked once, then again. Her breath caught. "Someone's looking for you." But she couldn't tell if that was good or bad. The dog, no, she couldn't keep saying dog. He needed a name. She looked at the soot on his muzzle, the broad chest, the gentleness in his eyes despite the hurt. "Bear," she whispered. "You look like a bear." He tilted his head as if considering the offer, then rested his chin on her knee. She smiled, a small, tired thing, and slid her blanket over his back. "Okay, Bear. You stay with me tonight." The storm outside thickened. Wind howled through the trees and the walls trembled under the gusts. Emma added another stick to the stove. The room flickered with orange light. That was when she heard it, a low rumble from far down the trail, an engine climbing slow, deliberate. Her pulse jumped. Bear's ears pricked, body going rigid. She hurried to the window and peeked through the crack in the curtain. A pickup truck crawled up the slope, lights dimmed, a beam sweeping the woods. It stopped just below the cabin. A door opened and a figure stepped out, coat collar, high hat brim low. The person moved to the side of the truck and knelt, touching the snow as if tracking something. Bear's growl deepened. Emma doused the fire with a damp cloth, plunging the room into near darkness. The man outside stood still, his breath steaming. After a moment, he climbed back into the truck. The headlights flared once across the window, catching Emma's wide eyes, then turned away. The engine faded down the ridge until it was gone. She stayed still for a long time. When she finally moved, her knees ached from the cold floor. Bear hadn't taken his gaze off the window. She whispered, "It's okay. They're gone." But she wasn't sure. She pulled her coat tighter, checked her bag. On the wall hung a faded map of the valley edges curled. She traced her finger along a dotted line toward a ranger station marked 2 miles east. "Tomorrow," she whispered, looking at Bear. "We'll go there. Maybe someone's still listening." He gave a soft woof tail, thumping once. She took that as a promise. Outside, the storm grew louder, but inside the broken cabin, a girl and a wounded dog shared the quiet warmth of survival, unaware that the night had already begun to close in around them. Morning broke over Pine Ridge with a pale metallic light that crept across the snow and spilled through the cracks of the cabin walls. The storm had weakened, but the air still bit like glass. Inside, the stove gave off a faint orange glow, barely strong enough to chase away the cold. Emma Quinn sat beside it, legs crossed, watching the last curls of smoke rise through the pipe. Her hands trembled slightly as she fed the fire another scrap of wood. Beside her, Bear slept soundly, his breath steady, his fur rising and falling in rhythm. For the first time in days, she didn't feel entirely alone. The memory of the truck's headlights still lingered the way they had sliced through the darkness, searching for something or someone. She hadn't told herself what she feared most, that whoever drove it might return. But morning had come and she was still here. She reached for her canvas sack and pulled out a dented can of soup, shaking it to hear the liquid slosh inside. "Breakfast," she murmured. Her voice sounded strange in the stillness, too small to fill the air. Bear's ears twitched, one eye half opening. "Half for you, half for me," she said with a faint smile. "You look like you could use it more, though." He gave a small grunt as if acknowledging fairness. Emma filled the pot with a handful of snow and placed it over the fire. The first wisps of steam carried a scent of salt and tin, and for a moment the cabin felt almost like a home. She began talking as she stirred her words, coming softly, almost shyly. "You used to belong to someone, didn't you?" she asked. "Someone who gave you commands and treats, maybe even medals?" Bear's head-lifted eyes focused on her as if he understood. "Yeah," she said. "You've got that look like you're waiting for orders." She smiled faintly. "Guess I'm the closest thing you've got right now." Her voice wavered, then steadied again. "Don't worry, Bear. We'll figure this out." When she reached down to stroke his fur, her fingers brushed something rough. She frowned and leaned closer. Beneath the cleaner scent of smoke and pine, a different odor lingered, bitter chemical like burned oil. She parted the fur near his neck and rubbed it between her fingers. Black residue smeared her skin, sticky like tar. "What happened to you?" she whispered. The smell clawed at her memory. Her father's coat had smelled the same the night before the fire, the night everything vanished in a haze of smoke and sirens. She shut her eyes for a second, breathing through it. Bear whined softly, lowering his head onto her knee. "You were near a fire," she said quietly. "Or something worse." The idea unsettled her more than she expected. Whoever had trained this dog had also hurt him or abandoned him when the world caught flame. She fed him half the soup, stirring the rest absently as snowflakes drifted against the glass. The day crawled forward. The wind returned in slow waves, brushing the cabin walls with soft groans. Emma kept busy cleaning the place, patching her coat with thread from the first aid kit. Every few minutes she talked to Bear. "You'd make a good partner," she told him. "You don't argue, don't interrupt. You just stay." The dog wagged his tail once, the soft thump echoing like an answer. By late afternoon the clouds had thickened again, the forest outside fading into a pale blur. Emma sat by the stove pulling an old radio from a shelf. Its casing was cracked, the antenna bent, but when she turned the knob, a low hum filled the room. Static poured from the speaker, steady, endless, comforting in its own way. "At least something still works," she whispered. She leaned back, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Bear lay beside her, his body radiating quiet warmth. She watched the glow from the fire reflect in his eyes and wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Maybe he thought she needed rescuing too. The radio hissed softly, a background noise that almost sounded like the ocean. Emma's eyelids grew heavy, but she kept listening, lost in the rhythm. Then suddenly the static cracked. A faint pulse pushed through, slow, deliberate. She sat upright, heart quickening. Adjusting the dial, she caught fragments of something more. A voice, faint and broken. S-O-S. She froze, holding her breath. The sound came again, clearer this time, dragged through interference. "Officer. Down." Her pulse thudded in her ears. Bear lifted his head, alert muscles tense. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, as though afraid to break the spell. She turned the dial again, and another word bled through. Trapped. Need. Assist. Then silence. Just the hiss of the storm pressing back in. Emma stared at the radio. The message had been real. Someone was alive out there, in trouble, maybe close. She looked at Bear, at the burned fur around his collar, at the number engraved into the metal tag. The smell of smoke, the man in the truck, the coated collar, it all began to twist together, threads pulling tight. Maybe he hadn't just wandered off. Maybe he had escaped. She lowered the radio volume until it was barely audible, only a whisper behind the crackle of the fire. "We'll go tomorrow," she said softly. "We'll follow the signal." Bear moved closer, his head resting against her side. She felt the slow rhythm of his breathing, steady and brave. Outside, the snow began again, thin flakes tumbling past the window like falling ash. Emma watched them drift, her eyes reflecting both fear and something fiercer, resolve. Somewhere in the frozen woods someone had called for help, and somehow she already knew the storm hadn't finished with them yet. The storm had become a living thing, howling through the pines and dragging the world into blindness. Emma Quinn pushed through the snow, every step a fight against the wind that tore at her coat and stung her face. The faint static of the radio pressed to her chest sputtered with broken words. SOS, officer down, toxin. She couldn't tell if it was real or the storm's cruel echo, but Bear's steady pace told her it was close. His black and tan fur was frosted white, his breath pluming in sharp bursts as he led her down the ridge. Then through the veil of snow she saw it dark shapes ahead, half buried, motionless. Her heart kicked hard. Bear, she whispered. Wait. But the dog didn't wait. He lunged forward, barking once, sharp and urgent, circling the figures. Emma stumbled after him, falling to her knees beside what she thought were mounds of drifted ice, until she brushed the snow away and her glove touched cloth skin and the unmistakable weight of a human arm. Two of them. A man and a woman. Both in uniform, both bound at the wrists with rough wire that had bitten into their flesh. Their faces were pale blue lips, cracked eyes half open, yet unseeing. The man's badge read Officer Ben Carter. The woman's sergeant, Dana Rowe. Emma's breath came fast, fogging the air. Oh, God. They're alive, she whispered when she saw the faint tremor in the woman's chest, the shallow pull of air barely visible in the cold. The smell hit her next sharp chemical wrong. Not blood, not decay, but something metallic and burning that stung her throat. Poison, she murmured, covering her mouth with her scarf. She tore off her gloves and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck, a pulse weak, fluttering. Bear, stay close, she said, voice trembling. The dog whined low, pacing beside her, his eyes darting to the tree line as if he sensed something unseen. Emma reached for her knife, cutting through the wire at the man's wrists. The skin beneath was raw and purple. She checked the woman next, but as she rolled her gently, something glinted on her shoulder, a bullet hole through the jacket, clean, precise, but no fresh blood. It wasn't what had brought her down. It was meant to confuse. Someone staged this, Emma whispered. They wanted people to think it was a shooting. She leaned closer, examining the snow near their heads. There were small pits burned into the ice, black and crusted, and the air there still shimmered faintly as if tainted by something invisible. She looked toward the ridge and saw the faint outline of a black van overturned and smoking faintly under the drift, its rear doors flung open. The scent was stronger that way, gasoline-laced with chemical bitterness. She realized then that the 2 officers hadn't been shot. They had been poisoned and left to die. The bullet holes, the overturned van, the shattered glass, it was all a cover. Someone had made sure the truth froze with them. Emma grabbed the radio on the man's shoulder and twisted the dial. It hissed, then cracked with life. Carter. Rowe. Respond. A voice called, faint but real. Emma pressed the button hard. This is Emma Quinn, she said, shouting over the wind. They're alive. 2 officers poisoned. Send help. Only static answered. She tried again. Nothing. Then, just before the signal died, a whisper bled through. If they're found, finish it. The words chilled her deeper than the cold. She dropped the radio eyes, darting to the ridge. Bear growled, hackles rising. A flicker of light moved through the storm, a flashlight beam sweeping side to side, slow and deliberate. Someone was out there, watching, hunting. Emma pulled both officers closer together, wrapping her coat over their shoulders, though it did little against the wind. She pressed her ear to Dana's lips, still breathing shallow and wheezing. The woman stirred faintly, her voice a ghost. Don't trust them? Then she slipped back into silence. Emma's pulse hammered in her throat. I won't, she whispered. Bear nudged her arm, urging her to move. The flashlight disappeared, swallowed by the snow. Emma knew she couldn't stay there. If whoever had done this came back, none of them would survive. She looked down at the officers, two strangers who had risked their lives for something she didn't yet understand, and then at Bear, loyal and unflinching. "We'll get them out," she said softly. She looped her arms under the woman's shoulders, straining with every ounce of strength she had. Bear pressed against her side, helping to drag. The snow burned her knees, her lungs screamed, but she didn't stop until the dark outline of the van vanished behind them. Only when they reached a small hollow between the trees did she collapse beside them, gasping. The man coughed once, a sound that barely rose above the wind. His lips moved, and Emma leaned close. "They betrayed us," he rasped. Then his eyes rolled back. The storm howled louder as if echoing his words. Emma stared into the white darkness, her heart pounding with a single realization whatever these officers had uncovered was enough to kill for, and now she was part of it. The snow had not stopped for 2 days, swallowing every sound except the wind. Emma Quinn sat huddled beside a small fire she had coaxed to life in a hollow near the tree line, its flickering light barely strong enough to warm her hands. Ben Carter lay on one side of the fire, his breathing ragged but steady, his wrists raw where the wire had cut into his skin. Dana Rowe lay opposite him, her body wrapped in Emma's coat and an old emergency blanket from Ben's pack. Her lips were pale, her pulse faint, but her eyes sometimes fluttered open for a heartbeat before sinking back into darkness. Bear sat between them, his head low, eyes never leaving the shadows beyond the flame. Emma had melted snow in a tin cup and forced a few drops into their mouths, whispering, "Stay with me. Please." She didn't know if they could hear her, but it kept her from falling apart. Hours passed like years before Ben stirred, coughing violently. Emma leaned over him. "Hey, easy," she said. "You're safe for now. You were poisoned, but you're alive." He blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused, then settled on her face. "Where?" "You were out in the snow," she said softly. "I found you and your partner. The van's gone. Whoever did it might come back." His eyes sharpened at that. "The van," he rasped. "The files. Did you see them?" "No," she said, frowning. "There was nothing left. Just smoke." He let out a long breath, almost a groan. "They burned everything." His voice trembled with fury and exhaustion. "We were investigating something. Something inside the department. It wasn't supposed to go this far." Emma hesitated, unsure if he was delirious. "Inside." He nodded, jaw tight. Internal Affairs started digging into money trails, equipment purchases off the books operations, missing narcotics, missing people. The deeper we looked, the more names we found. Captains, detectives, even a deputy chief. All tied to a black project no one would admit existed. His eyes met hers, clouded but hard. "We were told to drop it. We didn't." The fire crackled softly, sparks drifting up into the frozen air. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "So they tried to silence you?" she said quietly. Ben gave a faint nod. "They used our own protocols against us, called us to a meet, said they had evidence to clear the case. It was a trap. We walked into gas." He coughed again, wincing in pain. "Dana tried to radio for backup, but someone cut the channel. Then..." His eyes drifted toward the woman lying beside the fire. "She took the bullet meant for me." Emma turned sharply to Dana. "She was shot." "Yes," Ben whispered. "But it wasn't the poison that nearly killed her. It was the bullet. The rest of the team was supposed to cover us, but when the shots came, I recognized the sound. Police issue Glock." His hand trembled as he spoke. "Our own people. One of them pulled the trigger." Emma's throat tightened. "How do you know?" "Because I saw the muzzle flash," he said, "and I saw the badge on his arm before the smoke covered him. He knew I recognized him. His voice faltered, the weight of betrayal sinking into the silence. The wind shifted, blowing snow through the hollow, dimming the fire. Emma fed another stick into the flame, her hands shaking. "So, what were you going to do with the evidence?" she asked. "Take it to the FBI." Ben gave a faint, bitter laugh. "We didn't get that far. We didn't even trust the Bureau anymore. We were trying to get it to a journalist, a friend of Dana's from Portland, someone outside the system." He paused, his gaze distant. "We thought we were being clever. Turns out we were predictable." Bear lifted his head, suddenly ears pricked. Emma froze. The forest around them was silent, too silent. Then came a faint crunch, the sound of snow under boots. Ben's eyes met hers instantly. "Hide the fire," he whispered. Emma threw snow over the flames until only embers glowed. The world turned dark, the cold closing in again. Bear growled low, standing between her and the trees. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the clearing. Emma held her breath, pulling Dana closer. The light lingered for a moment, then disappeared. The sound of boots faded. Only the wind returned. "They're looking for you," Emma said. Ben shook his head weakly. "They're looking for what we found." He turned his face toward the sky, snow settling on his lashes. "You have to get her out of here. If they find Dana, they'll finish what they started." Emma stared at him. "I'm not leaving you." He gave a faint smile. "You're just a kid," he whispered. "You shouldn't even be here." "You're wrong," she said, her voice low but steady. "You wouldn't be alive if I wasn't." His eyes softened. "You sound like her," he murmured, nodding toward Dana. She never backed down either. His voice faded, his strength slipping away again. Emma touched his shoulder. "Rest. I'll keep watch." Bear lay down beside her, pressing against her leg for warmth, his ears still twitching toward the trees. The snow fell heavier now, covering the faint tracks that led to their hiding place. For the first time since the storm began, Emma felt not fear, but purpose. Whatever secret these officers carried, it was the reason they were hunted, and now it was the reason she couldn't stop. The storm eased at dawn, but the forest stayed hushed, as if even the wind was holding its breath. Emma Quinn sat beside the faint embers of their hidden fire, her body stiff with cold and exhaustion. Bear lay close to her, his head resting across her boots, while Ben Carter slept in shallow breaths beside Dana Rowe, whose color was returning slowly, though the pain in her side made every breath sharp and uneven. The snow around them glittered under a pale blue morning light. Emma had spent the night keeping the fire alive, afraid that if it died, so would they. When Dana finally stirred, Emma nearly dropped the tin cup she was holding. "Hey," she whispered. "You're awake." Dana blinked, her eyes unfocused at first, then tightening as awareness returned. "Where's Ben?" she croaked. "Right here," Emma said softly. "You both made it. You were poisoned. You need to stay still." Dana's eyes flicked toward Ben, then to the sky as if trying to remember how they had gotten here. "You pulled us out?" she asked. Emma nodded, unsure how to respond. Dana exhaled slowly, her face pale beneath the thin layer of soot and frost. "You shouldn't have," she whispered. "Now you're part of it." Emma frowned. Part of what Dana's gaze drifted to the tree line, her jaw tightening. "The reason we were out here." Her voice cracked hoarse but steady enough to carry weight. "You heard the name, didn't you, Sentinel?" The word hung heavy between them, a sound that seemed to draw the warmth from the air. Emma hesitated, recalling the broken message from the radio, the name Ben had murmured before he lost consciousness. Ben said it was a project, she said. Something buried. Dana's eyes darkened. Not buried enough. She pushed herself upright with a wince, gripping the side of her jacket to steady her breathing. Sentinel started 20 years ago as a defense initiative. Chemical containment, biological countermeasures, things meant to protect soldiers in hostile zones. But that's not what it became. Her voice faltered for a moment. They wanted control, not protection. They started testing compounds, new forms of nerve agents they could deny ever existed. Field trials in places they said were abandoned. Emma's heartbeat quickened. You're saying they tested it on people? Dana nodded, once her face drawn. Not soldiers. Civilians. Entire neighborhoods near industrial zones. When the results came in, Sentinel claimed the casualties were from accidents, factory leaks, contaminated water. But we knew. We saw what it did. Her hands trembled slightly. And I helped them once. Emma froze. You helped them. Dana looked away, shame carving deep lines around her eyes. Before I joined the department, I was part of Sentinel's logistics team. I didn't know what I was signing up for. They told us it was for national security to prevent foreign attacks. I believed them. Until the day they moved the trials stateside. She rubbed her temple as if trying to erase the memory. There was an incident in northern Oregon, a small town near the old steel plant. They released a new compound during a night shift test. Dozens died. They said it was a chemical explosion. But it wasn't. It was the gas. Emma's stomach turned. You were there. Dana's voice dropped to a whisper. I was on site security. I saw them load the canisters. I watched people collapse before the sirens even started. And I did nothing. I signed the reports that covered it up. For a moment only, the sound of snow dripping from the branches broke the silence. Emma's throat tightened as she studied the woman's face, strong but fractured, her eyes clouded by years of buried guilt. So that's why you were investigating, Emma said quietly. To make it right. Dana's lips quivered as she tried to smile, but it came out broken. Maybe too late for that. Sentinel didn't die. It just changed names, buried under new budgets and new officers. Ben and I found pieces, contracts, supply lists, people being paid to keep quiet. When we realized how deep it went, we became targets. She looked up suddenly, eyes wide with fear. You have to understand, Emma, if they know you helped us, they'll come for you too. They don't leave witnesses. Emma held her gaze steady, despite the fear clawing inside her. Then I'll just have to stay ahead of them. Dana gave a weak laugh that turned into a cough. You sound like someone who's never seen what they're capable of. Maybe not, Emma said, but I've seen what silence does. She fed another branch into the fire, the flames catching and lighting Dana's pale face. For a moment, the woman looked older, worn by memories too heavy to carry. Ben stirred, then groaning softly. You two talking about me? He mumbled, his voice hoarse but alive. Dana turned toward him, her expression softening. We're talking about how you got us into this mess. He smiled faintly. I thought that was you, but the humor faded quickly from his face. We need to move before nightfall, he said. If the storm clears, they'll send drones over the ridge. They'll find the van. Then they'll find us. Dana's eyes darted toward Emma. You heard him. You should go. Take the dog and head north. There's a ranger cabin near the river. Emma shook her head. Not without you. You can't save everyone. Kid, Ben said, his voice rough but gentle. Sometimes survival is the only way to tell the story. Emma met his gaze unflinching. Then we'll survive together. For a long time, no one spoke. The fire crackled softly, Bear's ears flicking toward the distant woods, where faint echoes carried through the cold. Dana's hand trembled as she pressed it against her wound, her eyes distant and haunted. I keep hearing them, she whispered suddenly. The ones from that night. The ones we couldn't save. Her voice broke, and for the first time Emma saw not a police officer or a fugitive, but a woman trapped inside her own memory, terrified of what the truth demanded. The shadows of Sentinel were no longer history. They were still alive, moving closer with every breath of wind that passed through the forest. By midday, the snowstorm began to break apart, leaving streaks of pale sunlight over the forest. The air was sharp and still, the silence so heavy that even the creak of melting ice sounded like a warning. Emma Quinn had managed to help Ben and Dana move from their shelter toward a small ridge where the trees grew closer together, forming a natural wall against the wind. They walked slowly, every step sinking deep into the snow. Ben leaned heavily on her shoulder, his breath ragged, while Dana limped beside them, one arm pressed against her bandaged side. Bear led the way, his fur glinting like wet coal under the weak light, his movements cautious and deliberate. "We can rest soon," Emma said, though her voice wavered. "The ridge will keep us hidden." Dana nodded, her face pale. "You shouldn't be doing this for us," she whispered. "I don't have anyone else to do it," Emma replied softly. They reached the edge of the ridge where the snow leveled into a small clearing. A faint trail cut through the drifts, tire marks half buried but fresh. Emma crouched beside them, frowning. "Someone's been here," she murmured. Ben's jaw tightened. "Or still is." Before she could answer, Bear lifted his head, ears twitching. A sound drifted through the trees, the low hum of an engine. Moments later, a black SUV rolled slowly into view, its tires crunching softly over the snow. The sight of the flashing blue lights on the dash made Emma's heart leap. "Help," she whispered. She waved her arm as the vehicle approached. "Over here." The SUV stopped several yards away, and two figures stepped out, both in dark winter coats marked with the emblem of the state police. Their movements were calm, practiced too steady for the rough terrain. One was a tall man with silver hair and mirrored sunglasses. The other a younger woman with a radio clipped to her shoulder. "Are you Emma Quinn?" the man called out. "We received your distress call." Emma hesitated. "Yes," she said slowly. "They're hurt. Poisoned. They need a doctor." The man nodded, walking closer. "We'll take it from here." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Dana stiffened beside her, eyes narrowing. "Ben," she murmured, "look at their boots." He followed her gaze. Emma looked too and felt her stomach twist. The man and woman were walking easily through the snow, but there was something wrong. The powder didn't cling to their boots. No crust of ice, no wet sheen. Their soles were dry. They hadn't come from the storm. They had come from somewhere close, somewhere sheltered. Emma took an involuntary step back. "You said you got my call," she said slowly. "But the radio was broken." The man paused, tilting his head slightly. "We have multiple channels. You'd be surprised what we can hear." His voice was smooth, practiced. "Too careful." Ben's hand crept toward his sidearm, but his strength failed halfway. "Stay behind me," he muttered. The woman officer smiled faintly. "No need for that. We're here to help." She stepped forward, her hand brushing the radio at her shoulder. It crackled softly. Emma heard a male voice on the other end say, "Team 2, report. Have you located the assets?" The woman pressed the button, her expression unreadable. "Negative," she said. "But we found the witnesses." The word hit Emma like a slap. "Witnesses," she whispered. Dana's face went white. "Run," she hissed. The tall man moved instantly, drawing something from his coat, a syringe glinting silver in the pale light. Bear barked, lunging between them, his teeth bared. The man flinched back as Bear snapped at his arm, forcing him to drop the syringe into the snow. "Get to the trees!" Ben shouted, grabbing Dana by the elbow. Emma turned to run, but the woman officer raised her weapon, firing a tranquilizer that whistled past Emma's shoulder and buried itself in a tree. "Stop," she ordered. Her voice was calm, almost mechanical. "You don't understand what you're involved in." Emma didn't listen. She grabbed Ben's arm, pulling him forward as Bear snarled and snapped at the man's boots. Snow erupted around them, the clearing filling with chaos. "We need them alive," the man shouted, fumbling for another syringe. "Do not harm the dog." Emma stumbled into the trees, dragging Ben with her. Her lungs burned with cold air. Behind her, Bear's growl turned into a sharp yelp, then silence. She turned, panic flooding her chest, but Ben pulled her forward. "He's buying us time," he gasped. They pressed deeper into the forest until the sound of boots and shouting faded. Only when they reached a fallen log did they stop collapsing behind it. Emma's hands shook uncontrollably. "They weren't here to help," she said, her voice barely audible. "They came for us." Ben nodded weakly. "Sentinel, they must have intercepted your signal. They know there are survivors." Dana leaned against the log, her face ashen. "They called us witnesses," she whispered. "That means the program's still active." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The forest was silent except for the distant echo of engines fading into the hills. Emma's mind raced images flashing the dry boots, the syringe, the polished tone of authority that didn't sound like rescue. "If they find us again," she said, "they won't make the same mistake." Dana closed her eyes, her voice shaking. "They won't have to. They've already marked us." Emma looked toward the direction they had left Bear, her heart twisting. "Then we go back for him," she said. Ben tried to protest, but she cut him off. "He saved you once. Now it's our turn." The faintest breeze stirred the snow, carrying the scent of smoke, rubber oil, and something burning. Emma knew it wasn't from their fire. It came from the clearing. The rescue team wasn't covering tracks. They were erasing evidence. She stood slowly, staring toward the distant plume rising through the trees. "They're burning the scene," she whispered, "to make sure no one ever knows we were here." The forest had gone eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavier than sound. The wind no longer howled. It whispered, slow and deliberate, curling through the pines like breath over ice. Emma Quinn sat crouched behind the fallen log where they had taken shelter. Her gaze was locked on the faint plume of smoke rising through the trees, the last mark of where Bear had been left behind. "I'm going back," she said suddenly, her voice trembling but steady. Ben Carter, barely conscious, tried to push himself upright. "Emma, no," he rasped. "They'll be waiting." She shook her head, her eyes bright with determination. "He saved us. I'm not leaving him to die out there." Dana Rowe, her face ghostly pale from blood loss, whispered, "You'll never make it in this cold." Emma didn't answer. She tore off her wet gloves, the cold biting instantly into her fingers. "Then I'll freeze trying." She turned and started toward the clearing, her boots crunching softly in the snow. The forest swallowed her in seconds. Every gust of wind stung her eyes, every breath scraped like glass. She moved toward the smoke, guided only by instinct and the faint hope that Bear was still breathing. The air smelled faintly of oil and something burnt. When she reached the clearing, the remains of the black SUV were little more than twisted metal. The snow around it was scorched to ash, and there, half buried, lay Bear. His fur was darkened with soot, his body still. Emma dropped to her knees. "No," she whispered, voice cracking. "No, please." She pressed her hands against his side. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, faint, slow, his chest moved. "Bear," she cried softly, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You're alive. Stay with me, boy." She slipped her bare hands under him, pulling him into her lap, her skin burning against the cold. His breath came shallow and weak, fogging against the air. She rubbed his chest, her voice trembling. "It's okay. I've got you. I'm here." Behind her, a voice said, "Emma." She turned sharply. Dana stood a few yards away, limping toward her. "You'll freeze like that," she said. "Let me help." "Don't touch him," Emma snapped. Dana stopped, her eyes filled with something heavier than fear. "You can't save him alone," she said quietly. "Please." Emma hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. They draped their coats over Bear, trying to warm him with their bodies. His breathing steadied barely, but enough. Emma closed her eyes in relief. "He's going to be okay," she whispered. Dana didn't respond. She was staring at the scar behind Bear's ear, her expression unreadable. "I know this dog," Dana said after a moment. Emma frowned. "What?" "When I worked with Sentinel," Dana murmured. "They trained dogs like him, German shepherds, for containment. They branded them with ID marks. I remember one just like this. K9 Division Project Sentinel. He was part of an operation outside Ashfield." Emma froze. Ashfield. The name came out in a whisper. "That's where I'm from." Dana's eyes lifted slowly, pain written deep in them. "It wasn't a gas explosion, Emma. That's what they told the news, but it wasn't true. Sentinel was testing a compound, a neurotoxin, something they couldn't control. When it leaked, they ordered the site sealed." Emma stared at her, not understanding. "My parents worked there," she said slowly. "My dad was on the maintenance team." Dana nodded, her voice barely audible. "I know. I saw the report. I signed it." The words hit Emma like ice water. What she whispered. Dana's eyes filled with tears. "Your family's names were on the list. They said everyone inside was dead before containment was complete. I didn't know who they were until I saw you. I thought I was saving others by following orders. I thought it was too late." Emma's breath quickened. "You knew," she said, her voice shaking. "You knew, and you did nothing." "I was a coward," Dana whispered. "I begged them to reopen the gates. They refused. They said the gas had spread too far." Her words fell like broken glass. "You were never supposed to survive." Emma's chest constricted, her pulse roaring in her ears. "You," she said, her voice breaking. "You're the reason my family's gone." Dana bowed her head, tears freezing on her face. "Yes," she said simply. "And I've lived every day since wishing I could trade places with them." The air between them seemed to freeze solid. Emma looked at Bear, his chest rising weakly under their coats, then back at the woman who had destroyed her life. For a long time she said nothing. Then her voice came soft but cutting. "You don't get to be sorry." Dana's shoulders trembled. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she whispered. "I just needed you to know before it's too late. Sentinel will come back. They always do." The wind picked up again, scattering the ashes of the clearing across the snow. Emma pressed her hand gently against Bear's side. "He's still breathing," she said quietly, almost to herself. Dana nodded faintly. "So are we," she said, "for now." Somewhere beyond the ridge, the faint hum of engines stirred again, distant but growing. Emma looked toward the sound, her jaw tightening. "Then we don't have much time." The storm had begun to fade, but the world remained locked in silence. The snow no longer fell in sheets. It drifted slowly, gently, like the last breath of something dying. Emma Quinn sat beside Bear, her hands still pressed against his side, feeling the weak rhythm of life pulsing beneath her palms. Dana Rowe sat across from her, her face hollowed by guilt and exhaustion. Ben Carter was still unconscious nearby, his jacket wrapped around his shoulders like a shroud. The faint hum of engines had vanished, for now swallowed by the vast white distance. Emma finally spoke, her voice hoarse from cold and tears. "You said Sentinel will come back," she murmured. "Why? We don't have anything they want." Donna hesitated. That's not true, she said quietly. They came for something specific. A recovery team doesn't risk exposure in weather like this unless it's for something or someone vital. Emma frowned, not understanding. You mean one of you? Donna shook her head slowly. No. You. Emma stared at her. Me. The word hung in the air like a fragile thread. Dana's eyes softened, filled with a terrible clarity. You're the package, she whispered. The one they were ordered to retrieve. I didn't realize it before, but now it makes sense. Emma's pulse quickened. That doesn't make any sense. I'm nobody. I don't even have a home. Dana's breath came unevenly. You're not nobody. You're the last person alive who saw what happened in Ashfield. Emma's heart stuttered. I was a kid, she said. I don't remember anything. Dana looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and fear. That doesn't matter. Sentinel doesn't take chances. They erase witnesses, even ones who don't know what they saw. They must have been tracking you since the fire, waiting for the right moment to bring you in. Emma's stomach turned cold. So that's why they called us witnesses, she whispered. They weren't here to rescue anyone. They were here to take me. Dana nodded faintly. You're what they call the asset. They don't know what you remember, but they can't risk you remembering it all. The words settled like ice between them. Emma stared down at Bear, her voice trembling. All this time I thought it was bad luck. The fires, the people who disappeared, my mom leaving. But it was them. Dana bowed her head. It was always them. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft rasp of wind through the trees. Then Emma asked, Why now? Why, after all these years? Dana's eyes flicked toward the ridge. Because the Sentinel files weren't destroyed like they said. Someone has been leaking information, someone inside. They're cleaning house. That includes anyone connected to the original project. Emma's throat tightened. My dad, she whispered suddenly. He used to stay late at the plant. He said something about strange trucks coming in after dark, about shipments that weren't logged. He said he'd found something he couldn't explain. Dana's eyes widened, realization dawning like a wound reopening. Your father, she said slowly, was the one who tried to expose us. Emma looked at her confused. What are you talking about? Dana swallowed hard. Before the accident, we had a leak inside the plant. Someone was sending documents to a journalist in Portland. It nearly shut us down. We never found out who it was, just that he worked in maintenance and used the initials JQ. She met Emma's eyes, her voice breaking. Your father's name was Jacob Quinn, wasn't it? Emma didn't answer, but the look on her face said everything. Dana's breath caught. He wasn't just a worker. He was the whistleblower. The revelation struck Emma harder than the cold. They killed him, she said slowly, as if testing the words. They killed my father for trying to stop them. Dana nodded, tears filling her eyes. They called it containment protocol. But it wasn't about safety, it was about silence. When the gas leaked, they made sure no one got out, not even the ones who could tell the truth. Emma felt the world tilt again, her mind reeling. And my mother, she asked quietly. She died trying to save you, Dana said softly. The report said she was found near the east gate. The guard who sealed it told me she was carrying something a small child wrapped in a blanket. He said he heard her say your name before the door closed. Emma's breath hitched a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. The snow around them glittered faintly under the rising moon. Donna's voice faltered thick with remorse. That's why they want you, Emma. You're living proof of what they did. If you go missing, no one will ask why. They'll say it was the storm. They always do. Emma stared at her numb. And you? She asked quietly. Why are you helping me now? Dana looked away. Because I can't undo what I've done, she said. But I can make sure you live to tell the truth. Maybe that's the only way any of this means something." Ben stirred suddenly, coughing weakly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "We need to move," he rasped. "If they find us again, it's over." Dana nodded and began gathering what little they had left. Emma wrapped her arms around Bear, who was breathing faintly but steady now. As she stood, she felt the weight of everything settle on her shoulders. The truth, the loss, and the fragile thread of survival that tied them together. "They killed my father because he told the truth," she said softly. "So maybe it's time someone told it again." Dana looked at her, and for the first time there was a spark of something like hope in her tired eyes. "Then we'll start with that," she said. In the distance, a faint red glow pulsed against the horizon, the reflection of headlights cutting through the storm. Sentinel was coming. Emma tightened her grip on Bear and whispered, "Not this time." The wind had turned violent again, sweeping over the ridge in ragged bursts that carried fine shards of snow through the air. The night was a blur of white and gray, the forest trembling under the weight of the coming storm. Emma Quinn, Ben Carter, and Dana Rowe moved through the trees. Their bodies bent against the cold, each breath sharp as glass. Bear trudged beside Emma, limping but determined, his amber eyes fixed ahead. The hum of engines grew louder with every passing second, a low growl that rose and fell like thunder behind the hills. "They're close," Ben muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Keep moving toward the tower." Dana nodded, her expression tense. "The communications outpost. If we can reach it, we can broadcast the file." Emma looked at her. "What file?" "The one I downloaded before the fire," Dana said. "It's a full archive of Sentinel dates, test data, everything. But we need a federal channel to release it, otherwise they'll bury it again." The sound of tires crunching snow echoed nearby. Headlights cut through the trees, sweeping across the frozen ground. Ben raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He crouched, peering through the branches. "2 vehicles," he said softly. "And that's not rescue." The SUVs came to a stop in the clearing ahead, their doors opening in unison. Figures emerged, armed, their silhouettes sharp against the snow. In the center of the group stood a man in a heavy coat, his badge glinting under the floodlights. His voice carried easily through the wind. "Ben Carter," he called. "I know you're out there." Ben's jaw tightened. "Sheriff Maddox," he muttered. Emma frowned. "You know him?" "Used to," Ben said. "He was my partner before he took the Sentinel contract." The sheriff's voice rose. "You've got something that belongs to us. Come out and we'll make this simple." Dana's hand gripped the strap of her bag. "If they get the file, it's over," she whispered. "He'll destroy it himself." Ben's eyes darted toward the narrow valley that led to the tower. "We split up," he said. "I'll draw them off. You two keep moving." "No," Emma protested. "You can't." But he was already checking his radio, his breath fogging in the cold. "I can," he said. "And if I'm right, they won't leave until they hear what I've got to say." He looked at Dana. "You still have the recording from the warehouse?" She nodded. "The one where Maddox confesses to the cover-up. That's the one Ben said." He pressed a few buttons on his radio, the device blinking faintly. "All right. Let's give them something to listen to." Before Emma could speak, the sound of a rifle bolt echoed through the trees. A voice shouted, "Contact on the ridge." Flashlights swung toward them, cutting through the dark. Ben turned to Emma, his voice steady. "Go. Now." Emma hesitated, but Dana pulled her arm, dragging her into the trees. Bear followed, glancing back once before disappearing into the shadows. Ben crouched low, snow gathering on his shoulders. He waited until the first beam of light swept across his boots. Then he stood. "I'm right here," he called. The wind caught his voice and threw it across the clearing. The figures turned sharply, weapons raised. The sheriff stepped forward, his expression cold. "You never could stay quiet, could you, Ben?" he said. All those years, and you still think truth means something." Ben smiled faintly, his face pale under the moonlight. "It does when you record it." He pressed the transmitter on his shoulder. A burst of static filled the air. Then a voice crackled through the emergency channel carried far beyond the clearing. It was Sheriff Maddox's own voice, grainy but clear. "Seal the gates. No survivors. You hear me? We report this as a chemical fire. The Bureau signs off and Sentinel walks free." The sound froze everyone in place. Maddox's face drained of color. "Turn that off," he shouted. But the broadcast kept going, his voice spilling into every active law enforcement frequency across the state. Containment isn't about saving lives, it's about burying them. That's the order. That's how it's done. Ben stood motionless as the words played, his gaze locked on Maddox. The sheriff lunged forward, shouting for his men to seize him. Shots rang out, echoing through the trees. Emma and Dana heard them from the ridge, stopping just long enough to look back. Through the falling snow, they saw flashes of light figures moving and one shadow standing tall against the chaos. "He did it," Dana whispered. "He got it out." Emma's heart clenched. "He's not going to make it, is he?" Dana's silence was answer enough. They reached the clearing near the tower just as more vehicles appeared from the opposite side, blocking the path. Armed men spread out their radios, crackling with confused chatter, some stations still playing the sheriff's confession. In the midst of it, Emma stepped forward. Her breath misted in the air, her small frame dwarfed by the floodlights. Bear moved in front of her, standing tall despite his limp, the fur along his neck bristling. "You're not taking her," Dana said, her voice steady despite the tremor in it. One of the men hesitated. "Orders are to retrieve the package." "She's not a package," Dana snapped. "She's a child." The leader raised his weapon, but before he could speak, another burst of static cut through every radio at once. The confession played again louder, reaching even the men who stood there now. Some froze, others lowered their rifles slightly, uncertainty rippling through the ranks. Emma stood perfectly still, the wind tugging at her coat. Her eyes locked on the soldiers as the truth of what they'd done filled the night air. For the first time since it began, Sentinel hesitated. Far behind them, at the edge of the burning tree line, a single gunshot echoed a sound both final and freeing. Dana looked back, tears filling her eyes. "He bought us time," she whispered. Emma didn't speak. She stepped forward through the snow, placing her hand gently on Bear's head. The dog stood firm, a wall between her and the darkness. The storm had broken, but the reckoning had only just begun. Morning rose quietly over Ashfield. The storm long gone, but its echo still clinging to the frozen ground. The trees stood heavy with melting snow, and the air smelled of pine smoke and something clean like forgiveness. Emma Quinn stood near the communication tower, her small frame wrapped in a too-big coat. Beside her, Bear stirred weakly, his fur singed, but his eyes alive. She dropped to her knees, pressing her face into his neck. "You did it," she whispered. The dog's tail moved faintly against the snow, and her tears warmed the fur beneath her cheek. Across the clearing, federal agents moved with quiet urgency, gathering evidence, loading the wounded. The chaos of the night had turned into order. Dana Rowe sat under a pine tree, her wrists bound lightly, her expression calm in the pale light. She didn't resist. She looked almost peaceful. A tall woman in a bureau coat approached her, voice steady but gentle. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she told Emma. "It's over." Emma looked up, her voice small. "Ben." The woman paused, her eyes soft. "He didn't make it. But because of him, the truth's out. Sentinel's finished." Emma turned to the horizon where the snow met the fading storm clouds. "He kept his promise," she whispered. Dana closed her eyes. "He saved us all." The woman nodded slightly, glancing toward the sheriff being led to a transport truck. Maddox's badge had fallen into the snow, half buried like a forgotten lie. "He's under arrest," the agent said. "Conspiracy cover-up, attempted murder." The confession broadcast sealed his fate. The sheriff's eyes found Emma's for a fleeting second, but she looked away. His silence said what words couldn't his kingdom had fallen. When the noise faded, only the wind remained. Dana sat quietly watching the frost melt off her boots. "Telling the truth doesn't make it hurt less," she murmured. Emma crouched beside her bear, resting his head on Dana's leg. "But you told it?" the girl said softly. Dana gave a hollow laugh. "I don't deserve forgiveness." Emma looked at her with the kind of honesty only children have. "Maybe not yet, but you can start by not lying anymore." For a moment neither spoke. Then Dana nodded, tears sliding down her face. "Your father would have liked you," she whispered. Emma looked down. "He believed in doing what's right, even when it hurt." Weeks passed and winter loosened its grip. The valley thawed, the rivers swelled, and the sun touched the earth again. Emma stayed with federal agents while hearings unfolded. She testified once, her small voice steady as she recounted the night she found the 2 poisoned officers in the snow. Dana confessed everything, her part in Sentinel, the silence that killed innocence, the cover-up that took Emma's father. She was sentenced without protest. She sent Emma a letter before leaving. "The truth costs, but you paid it bravely." Emma never replied, but she kept it in her pocket. When Ben's funeral came, the town gathered beneath gray skies and soft rain. The service was small, no speeches, just a flag, a folded note and silence. Emma stood at the front, Bear sitting beside her. A detective handed her an envelope after the burial. Inside were signed adoption papers. Ben had filed them 2 weeks before the storm. Her breath caught as she read his name, the ink slightly smudged. She smiled faintly, whispering, "He wanted us to be family." By April, Ashfield was alive again. The forests breathed, the snow vanished, and wildflowers pushed through the damp soil. Emma moved into Ben's cabin at the edge of town, the one with cedar walls and a wood stove that creaked when it rained. The locals stopped by sometimes, leaving food or kind words, but mostly she and Bear lived quietly. She spent her mornings tending to the small garden he'd started and her evenings walking along the ridge. Sometimes when the wind brushed the trees, she imagined she could still hear Ben's voice through the hum of static, calm, steady, saying, "The truth doesn't die when someone speaks it." One afternoon, Bear led her toward the ravine where it had all begun. The ground was soft with new grass, and the last remnants of snow sparkled in the sun, near the spot where the patrol car had been buried. Something caught the light, a small wooden cross half hidden in the earth. Emma knelt and brushed away the dirt. Carved into the surface were the words, "For those who stayed true when silence was easier." She traced the letters, her fingers trembling. "He made this," she whispered. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and thawed soil, wrapping her in the warmth of something she couldn't name. She stood for a long while, the sunlight on her face. Bear beside her, his breathing even. "We're okay now," she said softly. "He'd want us to keep going." Bear wagged his tail, once his eyes bright. Together they turned toward the hill, the world around them glowing in shades of green and gold. The snow was gone, replaced by running water and soft earth, the kind that remembers pain but chooses life anyway. Emma looked back once more at the cross standing in the thawing field and smiled. "We made it," she whispered. Bear barked once, sharp and clear, the sound echoing through the hills until it melted into the wind. "Before we end, I want to hear from you. What moment in this story struck you the most, the storm, the truth revealed, or the courage that changed everything?" Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you would have done if you were in Emma's place that night. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Every week we share true stories of faith, loyalty, and the quiet miracles that still happen in ordinary lives. Your support helps us keep those stories alive and reminds the world that hope is never really lost.